Okay, why don't we get started? Welcome everyone. My name is Michele Rapp from the Office of Alumni Relations. I'm here with my colleague Katie, who's also helping to manage the session. And my role is as the Associate Director of Alumni Career Strategy, so organizing lots of programs like this. And I'm always interested in your ideas of other programs and topics that would be helpful. And just a couple of housekeeping things. So we'll be using the chat box for participation, and we will keep this interactive and you'll have chances to ask questions. If you joined, we like to keep attendance for our alumni records. If you just join with your first name, if you could just type into the chat your name with an initial or your whole name, that way we will be able to track attendance. So interviewing, I know you know a lot about interviewing, and my hope today is that you will hopefully gain some new ideas and at the same time maybe bring your attention to specific things that you want to polish or focus on in your interview preparation. So obviously we want to have interviews get easier and have the best possible impact and outcome. So just to get us started and warm up to this topic, I'd like to invite you in the chat box just to type in any unusual or unexpected job interview questions, just a little lighthearted start here. Any unusual job interview questions that you've gotten? Okay, so now they're coming in here. Wow, what do you regret in your life? That's heavy. Immediately going to compensation, we'll talk about that some more. We are going to talk about the weakness question. Diversity questions are maybe a different topic now with greater awareness on that. We are going to talk about tell me about yourself. I like that question, something that's not on your resume that you want us to know about. That's kind of fun. A wild idea that you've had. Disagreeing with your manager, that's a good one. All right, Victoria has, if you were a type of cereal, what would you be? That sounds like it's probably like coming from a marketing place. I've also heard what type of animal would you be? What type of superhero would you like to be? You will get the failure question. Okay, a time you dealt with a racially charged situation. And you'll often get asked why you're leaving your current position. Thank you all for these great examples. And just to say that dislike most about your last manager. Someone got a question about their degree. So it's always good with interview questions to think about what's going on behind this question? Why am I being asked this question? You know, sometimes interviewers are actually, they're worried too. Am I going to hire the wrong person and look bad? So behind certain questions like, you know, why did you leave your last job? There might be a worry of how long are you going to stay, things like that. And with the creative questions, sometimes places just want to see how you handle that. It might actually be important in that environment to be able to handle stress and uncertainty. And so my advice with those kind of questions is there's no right or wrong answer. You have to think on your feet, and that's part of interviewing too. So you kind of just have to roll with it, you know, and do your best. And again, there's no right answer, and try to have some fun. You know, I think that's often what they're looking for. So I'm going to turn my camera off as I go forward through this, but we're going to continue to use the chat and continue with this topic. Right now my slide thing is not advancing, which it did before. Hang on one second here. I'm going to stop and start again. There we go. I don't know why that happened, just to make me a little stressed. Speaking of stress interviews. All right, so things that we're going to cover today are types of interviews that you'll encounter, developing your marketing message, different ways to prepare, and strategies for behavioral interviews, strategies for tough interview questions, and also closing and wrapping up the interview and following up with thank yous. And again, we'll get into a lot of different things here and also take your questions. All right, not sure why I'm having so much trouble advancing slides. Let me just do that again. All right, so there's lots of different types of interviews that you'll encounter. I put virtual on the top of the list because that's the latest one that you're probably thinking about, and if you're having interviews, likely to be virtual. So I'm going to do a separate slide on that one. So screening interviews, those are also quite common, typically by phone, typically short, might be 20 or 30 minutes. The employer is just trying to check on some basic variables, whether it's your skills. They may ask about salary because they're trying to make sure that you're not commanding a salary that's out of their range. And again, they're just ruling people in and out, but they still could ask significant questions. And then human resources is often in the role of doing that first round of screening. You might get invited to a more in-depth HR interview before going on to a hiring manager. I typically think of the hiring manager, is really going to be concerned about, can you do this job? And they're going to be really looking at your skill set and how it fits. They may be looking at that more than the HR person, but I've also had some very in-depth and challenging HR interviews with behavioral questions. So you really need to be prepared for all of these. When you get invited for the interview, make sure you have all the details. Make sure you know who you're going to be meeting with, their job titles, expected length of time, especially if you get invited in for group interviews or a day or a half day of interviews. You're going to want to have all that information. And many places like to have a series of group interviews to get input from lots of different players that stakeholders that you might be interacting with, other members of the team. I think with those, you want to think ahead of time of, what might be of concern to this group. This group of people might be more of a customer of mine, or they may have a different set of concerns from the hiring manager. And you can always ask for this information. They'll tell you if for some reason they can't provide it. And the other thing about knowing who you're going to be meeting with is it's great to use LinkedIn to learn more about your interviewers. Sometimes I found that we know people in common, that we went to the same university or part of some groups in common, so that can be really positive. And there are places that have an interview over a meal, probably not so likely right now, but a lunch or dinner meeting. Why do you think places would have an interview over a meal? You can just put that in the chat. Yes, so meeting over a meal is a chance to bond, see how your social skills are, especially if you're going to be in sales or working with a lot of clients. That's going to be really important. See how you behave in a more casual setting, and definitely your dining etiquette matters. So just a few fun facts that I like to mention with meal interviews. And again, people are saying body language, even how you dress could be important. With interviews over a meal, things you may have heard are, it's really not about the food. So do not focus on the food. Turn off your cell phone, as Ruth is saying, and order food that's going to be easy to eat and that won't embarrass you. So they say don't have spinach, it's going to get stuck in your teeth. And the other thing that I think is sort of tricky about these lunch interviews or dinner interviews is that yes, you are going to relax and be more casual, and people often forget that they're on an interview and they don't answer the questions as well as they would as if they were sitting in an office. So never forget that you're still in an interview. Don't say inappropriate things, don't order alcohol, you know, all of that. So the meal interviews, right, he says maybe you want a snack beforehand so you're not starving and making a mess with the food. So those are things to consider. And someone mentioned case interviews. That's a whole specialty area, and I can share some resources on that, usually used in the consulting realm, and a few others. So a quick little poll here about how many of you have been on a virtual interview using Zoom or Skype? So you can choose yes or no. Great. So we have 56% of you have, and 44 have not. So pretty close there. So let's move on to that topic. Okay. So just some things, some tips here to put yourself at your best. You know the technology. If you don't know Zoom or Skype or whatever it might be, whatever platform, get that information. Make sure you've charged your devices, maybe do a little test of things with a friend even. And as you know, something that's really important is setting the stage. Look at your background, have it be as professional as you can. It's often recommended to have like a very simple, like a wall, a white wall, very simple, not distracting, or a virtual background. Take a look at the lighting, you know, check that out, and it can be different at different times of the day. Make sure you're not backlit where you're just completely in the dark. And it's really good to look at the camera height and distance. You don't need to have your face super close to the camera, and it's recommended that the camera be at eye level or even just a little bit above. And pay attention to issues of quiet so that you don't have disruption or loud noises coming from outside or inside your space. And also have the interviewer's contact information just in case something unexpected happens and you can still reach them. But really the most important thing is when you're speaking and giving your answers, you actually want to be looking at the camera, not the screen. So really practice that. You can practice it in your regular Zoom meetings. And the reason is that's where you're going to come across the best. And that's where you're kind of making eye contact with the interviewer. But obviously you want to look at the screen frequently because you're also trying to read their reactions. Any other, based on your own experiences, anything else that you want to add into the chat as other suggestions? Attire for Zoom interview, for what to wear to a Zoom interview. Great idea. So I would say to dress as though, however you would dress for that environment for a regular job interview. Because you're trying to make a good impression, you're trying to dress in a way that's appropriate to that environment. If you don't know what the culture is there, you could ask about the dress code. So, but again, you're trying to look your best. So dress for the role that you're applying for. Yes, and you can, as I've done, you can put books or things under your computer. Let others know that you need this quiet time. And think about backup options for your technology. So maybe you need to switch from your laptop to a phone. Great, so this really comes into that idea of being prepared. Someone said they've used FaceTime on their phone as well. Great. Okay, so I want to share, let's see how I do with my advancing of the slides here. Okay, I want to share some thoughts on ways to think about interviews, to have a mindset about that. So some people like interviews quite a lot. Some people get stressed by them. There's lots of different approaches. I like to think of it as it's a two-way communication between equal people. So it's a conversation. You want to keep it conversational. You want to, the other part is to connect with the other person. So sometimes people they're so focused on their answers that they forget that this is a human interaction. So I often try to remind myself, like, I want to connect to this person. And of course, it's kind of like a date. You're both checking each other out. The employer's looking at your skills, knowledge, personality, and fit with the culture. And you're learning about the job, the work group, the team, the manager, and the culture. And both people are trying to figure out whether it's a fit. Some people have said to me that they feel like this is like a sales thing and they're not salespeople. So sometimes you have to reframe things and think about a mindset. So for those of you that feel like it's not authentic to you or it's not who you are, my suggestion is to reframe it as you are communicating, you are informing or educating the interviewer about your experience and your strengths and what you're good at. So that can be another way to approach it. And keep in mind the employer's perspective is, what can you do for us? How can you help us solve our problems? So that's really what's on their mind. And I think people are at some level, thinking about, is this someone I want to have in the next cube from me, or want on my team, or want to see a lot of in meetings? So there is kind of a likability factor built into there as well. And I also want to mention too, there can be an introvert-extrovert thing here with interviews that I also relate to how much information you share and how much talking you do. I think some people can be more reserved and brief in their answers, and sometimes people can talk too much and lose the interviewer. So there's finding that right balance. I think interviewers as a whole and hiring managers want to feel like they got to know the person, that they got a lot of information. So if you're reserved, you might need to share and stretch a little bit more than you feel comfortable. And maybe if you're a talkative person, you've got to be mindful of, staying focused in your answers. I want to look at the topic of preparing for interviews. So if I let you know that you had an interview coming up on Tuesday, what are some things that you would do to prepare? You can type that into the chat. So we have reading up on the company in order to know more about the company, definitely. Want to prepare good questions to ask during the interview, definitely. Doing your research about the company. Research the interviewers as well. Definitely looking at the company website, study the job description, really study the role and what they might be expecting. Yes, and if you can do some informational interviews with people at that company, get kind of an inside scoop, that's really helpful. And let that come up in the interview too, because it shows your level of interest and your level of preparation. Yes, LinkedIn can be handy for seeing if you have contacts that work at that company. Someone, right, look at the company's mission, prepare your answers. News articles can be important, especially if the company has been in the news for good or bad reasons. Definitely prepping stories of your success, your accomplishments, how you brought revenue to the company. Yes, getting your outfit ready. Finding out more, reading reviews on Glassdoor. Prepare your questions, definitely. Matching the job description with your skills. I'm glad that we have mention of getting a good night's sleep, right? So the stress part of this is really important. Really important. What else do you do to handle reducing your stress if you feel stressed about interviews? You can add that to the chat too. Rehearsing for the interview is a good idea. You guys know the drill here. Doing a lot of research here, a lot of good preparation. Thank you for these great ideas. Using Google, thinking about tough questions that you might have. Oh, I like that there's an idea here about looking at the community work that the company may do. That can tell you a lot about their intentions and the culture. There's a question here about bringing or emailing extra copies of your resume. I think if it's in person, it never hurts to have those with you to, have a nice portfolio thing and have it in there. I think you don't need to email it. Marianne is looking at the company press releases, thinking about your salary expectations, relaxing the day before, practicing. Christine has an idea here about, doing some planning, thinking about what would you do in that role. That's very helpful. Okay, Heath has thinking about 30, 60, 90-day plan. And Lisa has, this is good, in some fields, and if it were in person, you might have a portfolio to show. You might have some physical things to bring, or if you're in the arts, you're going to have a portfolio. And Catherine's asking about sort of how much information do you gather? I mean, I think the key thing is being prepared with your answers, but showing that you've done your homework, but maybe not to get bogged down in it. Right, and I guess you are speaking to, there is the potential with LinkedIn research on the interviewers. You don't want to feel kind of creepy or think about how you use that information. Like I was in an interview where someone kind of kept repeating too much that was on everybody's profile, and it was a little odd. But showing that you've done some basic research is really fine. It is fine to have, if it's a live interview or even virtual, having a piece of paper with your questions or a pad. The main thing I encourage is not getting distracted by looking at stuff or taking notes, because you really want to keep your presence in the conversation. But yes, it's fine to refer to that, to your questions. Mock interviews are great. The Career Design Office at Northeastern offers that, and you can certainly practice with a friend. And Nicholas has breathing exercises, and we have Ash meditation. And I like Marianne's suggestion of taking improv classes. If you need to sort of stretch more and get more comfortable, that can be really fun and helpful. And the idea about breathing and meditation and things, what I encourage people to do is when they're listening during the interview and not talking, to remember to breathe, because breathing is what's going to help you relax, really relax your body. So be sure to do that. Getting some exercise, feel good in the clothes that you're going to be wearing. If you're showing up in person, you might do a little test to make sure. So we've got lots of great ideas here. Thank you. Use the fake it till you make it pose. Excellent. Wow, we've got so many good ideas here. Thank you. Got lots of practices here. Excellent. This is an advanced audience. So I'm actually, you've covered so much stuff that I'm going to skip my preparation slide. Actually, I will highlight a few things from here. We're going to talk more about your marketing message. One thing I like to use note cards I put a question on one side and some bullets on the back. It's not useful to memorize a script because you won't come out naturally in the interview. And I don't know if people have heard about this thing called power poses by Amy Cuddy, but she has some suggestions that actually standing in certain, sort of like a muscle person or some yoga poses kind of things can increase your confidence. So moving your body before an interview can help you relax. It can help you feel confident. You can kind of ground in your feeling of confidence as well. And actually for telephone interviews, I like to stand up. I feel like that gives me better vocal projection and confidence. Ash has done some power poses, and Heath has a good point about not sitting on a swivel chair, right? Because you don't want to be fidgety, you don't want to be twirling around unless you're interviewing for a dance job. So great advice. Okay. Just going to, having trouble having my slide advance here. Okay. Great. So one of my favorite topics is thinking about your marketing message and as part of your preparation. And I like to tell people that no matter what field you're in, you might be an accountant, a computer scientist, a lab scientist, all kinds of things, a school teacher. But when you are in the job search, you become a marketer. But basically what this means is I like you to think about when you go on that interview, what are 5 things you want them to remember about you? They're going to talk to a lot of people. What are they going to remember about you? And usually that means you need some examples to back up things that you're claiming about yourself. So if you say that you're very analytical and a problem solver, have some examples to share. It's also really good to think about what makes you unique. What is it that you bring to the table? Maybe it's international experience, having been from another place or living in other countries. Maybe that makes you unique. Think about, notice what you bring to the table in your current team, in your workplace, or in classes that you've taken. Maybe you tend to be the person that gets everybody involved in a team, or maybe you're the person that keeps everybody on track. So those are other things. There may be unique aspects of your experience. Even if you're a career changer, think about, you may have less skills in your new chosen profession, but you may have advantages. Maybe you're a finance person that came from marketing. That gives you certain advantages. Think about, how do you add value at work? And consider the difference between skills and qualities. So I think employers in general are looking about what skills you bring. What can you do for them? What do you know how to do? There are some qualities, and I feel like creativity is both a quality and a skill that you bring. So if you're thinking about your strengths, try to communicate a mix of skills and maybe some qualities. And just check that those qualities are highly relevant to the work that you do and are part of what makes you valuable and unique. Anything else when you think about your message and what you want to get across? And we probably have some marketers here and other good ideas. Anything else that you would bring to your message and being memorable? Yes, identifying core competencies is really important. Yeah, and there's a question about skills versus qualities. So I used to do some work with accounting master's students. And when I would ask them about their strengths in a mock interview, some of them would say, I'm very reliable, I'm very hardworking. And I would smile and say, well, I am too, but I shouldn't be an accountant. So what makes you, what makes you a good accountant? So it's not to say that qualities don't matter, but just be careful that you're also really promoting the actual technical or job skills that you have. And bringing evidence of, you can say a lot of things about yourself, but it's really in the evidence, the projects and the examples and stories. So it's telling your story and highlighting your abilities and accomplishments, as Dee is saying. And it's true, like you're going to be asked about teamwork, and if you have an example about handling conflict, diffusing conflict, getting along with people, that's always good as well. Speaking of competencies, I've got a list of some here. Whoops. So these are some common competencies. I'm sure there's others that are relevant in your line of work. So a lot of interviewers are trying to say, like, what are the competencies in this role and even at our company that are likely to be for your guarantee success? So when you look at these competencies and add to this list, it can also help you anticipate questions like, oh, I'm sure they're going to ask me about my leadership skills. I'm sure they're going to ask me about, a communication challenge or a customer service challenge, that kind of thing. So just to give you an idea of where the interviewer is coming from. A couple of thoughts about how to respond to questions and kind of, again, like a mindset. A lot of times people ask me, can I be honest during an interview? And I definitely want you to be authentic during an interview, but I also want you to be strategic. And that's why we have chess here, and I'm actually not very good at chess because I'm not good at strategy. But on an interview, the reality is there's lots of different ways you can answer a question, but what's going to put you in the best light? So that's what we're looking for. We talked earlier about considering the purpose of the question. And this whole issue of honesty, authenticity comes up around the what's a weakness question. The behavioral version of that is tell me about a time that you failed, which is really not what you want to be talking about on an interview, but it's almost like, I almost feel like it's an exercise or a game of the interview these days. So there is a strategy. The employer is really looking for some self-awareness and some self-improvement. So the goal here is not to give your worst weakness, and you shouldn't give a weakness that's really significant for that job. So I actually spent a lot of time with people on trying to figure this out. So sometimes you have to think about your weaknesses and then pick one that's not a big deal. So you give that weakness, and you also talk about what you're doing to improve. And in talking with people about this, I often find too that weaknesses often have an upside, or they show something positive about you. So that can also be part of this. There are some weaknesses that recruiters hear all the time, like I'm a perfectionist. So try to find something a little bit different. Another strategy is to avoid negative comments about your employers, your universities, your boss, your coworker. Just stay away from that. It may be true that you're leaving because of something negative, a negative manager, a negative company. But what happens when you say negative things is that the employer's not sure if it's really that you're the problem or that those things are true. So, if someone asks about why you left your company, even if it was for a bad manager that you wanted to leave, you want to focus on the more typical positive answers, which is seeking a new challenge, seeking advancement and growth, seeking a larger company or smaller company. So just keep it positive. Because again, you're being conscious of the impression that you're making. Any questions? Any questions here? Yes, and I will be sharing the slides after this. Okay. Okay, so we started to talk about this, but examples are really important because the interviewer is just there with you. They don't really know what you've been doing. It's sort of on your resume, but being able to claim and demonstrate, to back up what you're saying. And for some of us, this is natural. Some of us have to push ourselves to remember to do that. So give examples. You're kind of you're painting a picture in their mind. Talk about significant projects. Talk about things that you initiated, fixed, improved. What were the results? What were the outcomes? If you're able to use numbers, that's great. And you are trying to you're trying to impress the interviewer, and you're also trying to help them know the significance of things that you did. So, I worked on the first ever, or this was a system-wide tech upgrade. This was an international project impacting 10 offices. So really help people understand, understand the importance of what you're doing, and choose examples that are very relevant to the job that you're applying to. Also, and this is a kind of American cultural thing, is the focus should be on the role that you played and the skills that you used. So sometimes when I practice with people, they'll say, our team did this, we did this, and the interviewer is trying to understand the role that you played. And again, thinking about your value and uniqueness. Okay, so we're going to, and actually, so Martin, you're making me think about, excuse me, that some of you, I think employers are interested in what happened in the work world, but some of you may have had a chance to demonstrate skills through your volunteer activities, through professional associations, things like that. So know that you can bring in other experiences. I know I got some leadership experiences through professional associations, or if you're returning to work after a career break, you may end up talking about other things that you did outside of a workplace. But just understand that the employer may prioritize work things, but still you can demonstrate. Maybe a lot of people have done fundraising, for example, through charities that they're involved with, and think about what you're trying to demonstrate through those examples. Okay, so behavioral interviews. So it's interesting to realize that employers are not sure really what the best way is to hire people. And so behavioral interviews came out of this idea of, let's get people to talk about actual things that happened other than hypothetical questions. So you'll have a behavioral question when they say, tell me about a time when. Describe a situation in which. So you're always talking about a specific situation, and it means having to come up with examples. So one of the best interview prep strategies you can do that will help you with many questions is to do a lot of work ahead of time. Make a list of accomplishments, things you initiated, fixed, improved, increased, decreased, things you're proud of, how you had an impact. Think about those things and really play with this idea. So there's a framework for the answer, which is problem, action, result. Problem is briefly describing the situation, the challenge, the task you were involved in, the action that you took, what did you do, and what was the positive outcome? And you always want to show a positive outcome. What I love about that kind of preparation is that I call it having some examples in your pocket, because I'm not good at thinking on my feet when I have to come up with these examples. So what you'll find is that an example about leadership also works good as an example about communication or about problem solving. So as you look at these examples and you can realize the other ways that they can be used, so you'll be a lot more prepared. So as an example, if I was asked, let's say I worked in customer service and I was asked to talk about handling a difficult customer interaction or situation. So I can say, I was working as a customer service rep at XYZ company. I was on the phones and I got a call from a customer who had been a longtime customer, and they were irate. They had a big order coming from us. It did not get there on time, and it was causing tons of other problems for them, and they were furious. So I realized that the first thing I had to do was listen to this person and try to calm them. So I listened, I tried to make sure I understood all the details. I acknowledged the situation. I showed my interest in helping. I then decided and let the customer know that I was going to talk to 2 other departments to see whether we could expedite a new order to them. And I let the customer know I'd be calling them back later and as soon as possible. And what happened is I was able to work with these 2 departments to expedite an order that would come the next day and resolve the situation. And as it turns out, the customer was really appreciative of us doing this. They continue to be an ongoing and lifetime customer. And they also wrote a letter to the president of the company thanking them for how we handled this. Okay, so hopefully that gives you an idea of about the length of it. You're just trying to set the stage of the situation, but the focus is also on the action that you took and the impact. And also know that with behavioral questions, there's no right or wrong answer because they're your experiences. An interviewer might ask you some follow-up questions. What were you thinking? Why did you do that? Why didn't you do something else? So you might get some more questions from that. But that's the idea. I'm going to have us, I want to get through some slides here, but I'm going to also give us a chance to do some practice preparing one of these behavioral questions. Any questions on the behavioral ones? And you can find lots of lists online of typical behavioral questions. Some of you may have heard PAR, some of you have heard STAR. I think STAR is situation / task, action and result. So right, it's the same and it's a framework. What are some questions that you consider, some of you have thrown in some of these things, but what questions do you consider to be tough questions? Lisa fell into my trap because I'm going to talk about, tell me about yourself. That's the first one that comes to mind for me. No one likes that. Conflict with a coworker, how you resolved it. Potential age things, right? The weakness question. All right, Rima's already done these examples. Your greatest success. Why this company? That's always a good question. Yeah, weakness, why did you fail? Facing a challenge. Yes, what you look for in a manager is a common one. You may get sort of age implied or direct age issues. How many players in a soccer game? Whoa. Decision making, that's definitely a reasonable thing to ask. Things about leadership, gaps in your work history, I'm going to talk about that. 5-year goals, again, very common. Someone asked about what if you can't think of an example, and I'm really glad you asked that question. You know, that can happen, right? And even it also reminds me of kind of taking a positive approach. Like if someone says, oh, you know, you don't have such and such software, you know, you're always trying to keep it positive, which is to also say, well, I haven't done that, but I did, you know, I am tech savvy. And in fact, I, you know, used LinkedIn Learning to learn XYZ software. You know, I was actually a go-to person in my office for tech problems. And I've used similar database software. So even if you don't have a skill and you're taken by surprise, you can show something related. Well, I don't have that, but what I do have is X. And it's okay to say, like, you know, I'm having trouble thinking of an example of that. Can I come back to that? Or I'm having trouble thinking of that, but I think this is similar and here's what it is. I've done all those things, including asking for that pause to come back. And I like to tell people something that I've observed, which is, you know, you're not going to be prepared for every single question. There's some standard questions that you should be prepared for, like the ones that we're talking about. And my experience has been, even if I blew a question and did overall well, I got invited back. So I like to take some reassurance. You want to be prepared, but I also take some assurance in knowing that people get a sense of who I am if I'm doing well overall. Short-term goal that you sacrifice for a long time. Achievement, spinning a positive, or how to spin positive a negative experience. Great. These are really good. So these are the tough questions. I'm going to give you some advice on tell me about yourself because it throws everybody off, or no one likes this question, I don't think. And the reason it's hard is that it's just too unstructured and too open-ended. And what's worse is that it often comes right at the start of the interview. So it can really throw you off. So just some advice, another way to think about this is, can you tell me a little bit about your work experience and what's brought you here today because you're interested in this job? You know, so you could say, you know, like I'm an experienced career coach in addition to being a great career counselor. I also have a long history of developing creative and innovative and diverse programs, guest speakers and workshops to meet the needs of both alumni and graduate students. You know, this position really caught my attention because I know a lot about your company and I'm impressed with the XYZ work that you're doing. You know, you're a leader in the career services world, something like that. So it's really short, it should be under a minute. Think of it as how you want to, it's sort of like your elevator pitch. And so it really doesn't have to be that hard. I did have a thing here about leaving a job, why you left a job. You know, they just may want to know, especially if it's a short time that you've been somewhere. And sometimes people have gaps in their resumes for lots of different reasons. So I think what's important is just preparing positive responses to these kind of questions in advance so you're not taken by surprise. And, you know, again, also, I guess also it makes me think of layoffs, which obviously are common right now, that you may want to be prepared for. In terms of things like a layoff, what you're trying to do in general, like, so you may have gotten laid off because of a big change at the company or reorg. If you can explain why it has nothing to do with your performance, that's ideal. You know, the company did a reorg, my department was eliminated, our team was eliminated, 500 people lost their jobs during this time for financial reasons. So you're trying to make it not about your performance. If it is about your performance, sometimes there's language about it there not being a good fit. You know, that's something that you can get some help with, how to talk about. And I also recommend, you know, if you're feeling upset about what happened, or if the layoff is recent, you kind of want to work through that and kind of get to a good answer, but also maybe not start job hunting until you've sort of had a chance to process that, because sometimes the emotional stuff can get in the way of being ready to go out on interviews. So I'm going to switch to this topic of preparing your questions for the interview. So one is we were saying that it's conversational, so you may be asking some questions during the interview. The other is having questions in mind that you want to ask. And they'll always ask you at the end, do you have any questions? And even if you don't, it's really important to ask some questions. But something that's really important here is that it's still an opportunity to show how you think, how you approach your work. I advise people to pretend they're a consultant going into this job. What questions would you have about the job, the tasks, the challenges, the workplace? And then the other thing is that there are common questions, and they're not bad questions, but if you're able to kind of ask slightly different questions, that can be beneficial. So it is common to want to know, what are the top priorities in this role for the next 3 to 6 months? A friend of mine just said she asked, a year from now, looking back on hiring, if you were to hire me, what would a success look like a year from now? It also depends the kind of questions you ask depend where you are in the process, if it's an earlier interview or a later interview. When I'm getting closer to what I think is being hired, or if I actually have an offer, I like to ask open-ended questions like, how are the resources available to get the job done? What's a good day or a bad day like here? You probably at some point want to know, like, did the previous person leave for another job in the company, outside the company? Did they not last very long? Has there been a lot of turnover? During COVID, I wouldn't get too bogged down in this, but how is the business? How are the goals unfolding in the COVID environment, for example? So these are the kind of things that you can ask. Just want to remind you to pay attention to nonverbal. If you're in person, a firm handshake is important. Think about confidence and posture and your smile for virtual interviews and on the phone. Being aware some of us talk too loud, too soft, too fast, too slow. And another winning thing is to let your enthusiasm for what you do or your enthusiasm for the position come through. People like to hire people who are enthusiastic and, excited about what they do. And also just being prepared for small talk at the start of an interview. Okay, I'm just going to move this slide ahead. At the end of the interview, show that you're interested. It's great to say, I really enjoyed speaking with you. This position sounds like a good fit with my XYZ skills. And I'm very interested in, and what are the next steps in the hiring process? This is really helpful because you want to know how soon to follow up. If they say the interviews are going on for 3 weeks, you don't want to call them next week. Also, be sure to collect contact information again so that you can do follow-up and that you can do thank yous. I recommend taking some time that same day to jot down some notes. What do I wish I had done differently on this interview? What are some questions that I have about this position, the company, the manager that I want to be sure to ask? And also, follow up, as long as you're being polite, as long as you're not stalking or calling every day, is, you want to show your interest. You don't want to seem desperate in how you approach them, but follow up is very reasonable thing to do. And the last thing is that you do want to follow up with thank yous. And I want to highlight that this is still part of your marketing campaign. So you don't want to just say thanks for meeting with me. You want to reiterate, because now you know a lot more about what they care about, what the job's about. So this is a great chance to re-emphasize you know, some things about your qualifications. You might have heard about some interesting project. You could show interest in that as well. So it should be brief, but build on what you learned from the interview and think of it still as part of your marketing. And it's fine if you know, email is fine. In some professions, people like to send cards, but it also depends on the timing of the hiring decision. And it's okay to send an email to a group of people that met with you as a group. So I know we're getting close on time. I want to try to address some questions. Employers should not be asking about family things. So that's you want to be aware of. People should be focusing on job relevant things. I think for a live interview, employers, I think, should be open to not shaking hands. You can, with thank yous, do email, you can do mail. Some people even do both. So I would take into account kind of the environment, the culture. If you're a tech person, it's probably going to be email. If you're looking at a PR firm or a nonprofit, it could be mail. But you want to get the message out sooner rather than later. The question of being overqualified, I mean, from the hiring manager's perspective, they don't want to be bringing in someone that they think is going to be bored in the job and lose interest or try to move on. So sometimes that's an incorrect perception. So sometimes not getting called back is not about your qualifications. It's not that you can't do the job, it's that you may not be seen as the ideal fit for that level of role. I'd say interviews do vary. Like, again, the screening might be a half an hour. Other interviews might be an hour. If they're having you do a bunch, it might be a series of 45 minutes. So do ask ahead of time. And I know we're at the end. So, you know, you might be looking at transferable skills and selling skills from a previous job, maybe not all of them, but you're trying to instill confidence that you can do the new job. And it's true that you may not get a response even to a thank you note. But it's fine to follow up even if you haven't heard from them. The Career Studio and the Career Center, which does mock interviews, it's careers.northeastern.edu. And internal interviews, you might actually have some advantages. You probably know more about the company. You might be able to get some inside information about the hiring manager, what goes on in that department. I think if they say 2 weeks, you can contact them right after 2 weeks. Yep, Lorene, don't go through every job. Just keep that. Tell me about yourself to 1 minute or less. Yes, and it's a great idea to try to get feedback when you don't get hired. Know that employers will be very careful about that because they might be afraid you're going to sue them. But you can also say, you know, I'm always looking to improve. I'm always looking to improve. You know, I'd appreciate any feedback about my skills or my interviewing. Yeah, and I would say, you know, the lunch thing is probably not going to happen right now. So, and disability questions, I'd be happy to communicate beyond today about that. So I know there's a lot more questions we can ask here. Feel free to follow up with me. I'll put my put my email in there. I really appreciate the great participation, the great questions. I will be sending out the slides, and there is a slide of some practice behavioral questions that you can take a look at. Consider doing a mock interview with the Career Design Office. This is being recorded, and it will be sent out along with a brief survey, and also our very brief survey for feedback is in the chat box here. Katie had posted it. So thank you for joining us today. Keep learning on this topic, keep reading things about it. Feel free to ask questions too. And we hope to see you at future webinars. Thank you for coming.